Tule Elk.
Tule Elk. Tule Elk.
Tule Elk.
Tule Elk. The elk here in Tomales Point have been dying.
More than 150 Tule elks have died.
So the Park Service says this is a natural population decline. And we say it can't be natural if they're in a fenced compound where they can't escape. The drought conditions have completely halted any new breeding within the population. The elk are trapped behind the fence with a dwindling water supply.
The population of the Tule elk is declining.
Well, they're beautiful, they're majestic, they are endemic to California and occur nowhere else, and they got very, very close to extinction. 19th century and early 20th century, they were hunted, they suffered like many other species from habitat loss, from human encroachment, and this was before there was anything like an environmental movement. It was thought that they were all gone. And then a few were discovered on a ranch in Southern California. Once they were discovered, the California Fish and Wildlife Department, the National Park Service, and a few governmental agencies spread them around and ran a restoration effort. And it is a signal achievement of California state government that these animals went from 2 or 5 or 10, nobody really knows, to the 6,000 or 7,000 that exist today. When a species gets close to extinction, it goes, and we're lost without it. So this is a great success story. There used to be quite a lot more. There used to be about 500,000. So they're at about 1% of their historical numbers. There is only 6,000 or 7,000. When you get that vulnerable, then things can happen, like a blight disease could happen. There's been a lot of droughts which have really affected them. And the droughts stand to get worse because of climate change. There were very few left at some point, so they went through a very narrow genetic bottleneck. So that means they're susceptible to some disease. They don't have a lot of genetic diversity. They've got whatever the 100 years that they've sort of fought back for up until now. Point Reyes National Seashore, just north of San Francisco in West Marin County. It's the only national seashore on the West Coast.
It is a remarkable place. It is home to over 50% of North America's bird species. There's an awesome amount of predators out here, bobcats and coyotes and fox and badgers. It's a magical place. They
were brought there in 1978. And what the Park Service did is they erected this 8-foot fence.
It's a 3-mile, 8-foot-high fence that runs across the peninsula out of Goose Point Ranch. And it's been the center of controversy for a while now.
The fence was put there to prevent them moving out of that area, moving south, because there are cattle ranches there and dairies. So it was really to keep the elk from bothering the ranches and competing for forage with the cows or damaging fences or causing any other problem for the ranches.
It's in the southern border of the elk reserve, prevent the elk from moving farther south and reaching some of those more nutritious areas and where there's ample water for them.
They were first just put north of the fence. So that was the only place they were. Some of them escaped and apparently swam around the fence. And then the Park Service also deliberately took some of them and moved them south in the park. When they did that, they told the ranches, we'll make sure that they don't bother you, but we're going to put some here. So there's actually 3 herds in the park. because the National Park Service will say, we check the springs and the water holes and it's fine. You know, it's one thing to say, we think we can find some water here and there. It's another thing to have these wild animals be healthy and find the resources they need. So north of the fence, there's restricted water. Half or a third of the herd in each of these droughts died. So the Park Service would say it wasn't dehydration, but also they have malnutrition because in periods of drought, the forage is not what it needs to be. They can't wander south because the fence is there. They're in a relatively enclosed area and dying by the hundreds when the drought comes. The National Park Service, which is a jewel for the United States, it's been called America's best idea. You know, there's a lot of wonderful things about the Park Service. The Park Service here in this case was not taking care of these animals. So the ranchers are very influential. These are families that have been in Marin County for a century or a century and a half. They are connected. They, in many cases, are wealthy. Jared Huffman, who I mentioned, is an extremely green guy. He goes after fossil fuels. He is very liberal with respect to climate change and focusing on good things for the future. He tends not to mention ranching very much because a lot of his constituents and a lot of his base is from ranches. The agricultural industry has got lobbyists, you know, at all levels. A lot of the local community are ranchers. And then some of the rest of the local community are people whose businesses depend on the ranches. You know, equipment or a feed or whatever it is. Now, a lot of the rest of the local community grew up with these ranchers. There are a lot of people in the local community who want ranching out of Point Reyes and favor the elk. It's just some of them are not that vocal because the more you say, the more, you know, there's almost sort of a self-policing kind of social cost if you come out and you say too much about it. And I know because I'm in the middle of paying that social cost.
And the National Park Service has issued a record of decision that they will cap the number of Tule elk in that area. And you know, I think that's in response to some pretty heavy political pressure. U.S. government bought the land and allowed the ranchers to stay for up to 25 years to life. You know, those leases have expired, and the ranchers are still here. Yes, I think they have a lot of influence over what happens. I think politics are very strong. Politicians are heavily involved in the ranching issue.
It gives first priority to members of these multi-generational historic ranching families. It calls for a third elk herd to be managed at a certain population level. You can't allow the herd to get that big.
That influence, I think, kept the ranches in business in Point Reyes for quite a long time, and it finally looks like tide is starting to turn. I think in Point Reyes they're about to get a lot of benefit. The fence will come down and they'll be given more area. That means that the 500 or 600 that are in Point Reyes should over time turn into a few thousand. If you're near Point Reyes, look out for the decisions. When there are decisions about the fence and about the ranches, there's going to be a wonderful opportunity for people to get out in the park and help with restoration. Pull weeds, pull fence posts, coil up barbed wire. As soon as that happens, people should not go away and say, okay, we won. Now it's like put your money where your mouth is. You wanted ranches restored, get out there and do some work, you know, sweat a little bit.
It's an iconic species. It really represents a great comeback for a really iconic animal for California. So I'm really optimistic in the park that they will find their place and they'll have their continued protections.